Good evening and welcome to On the Record. I'm your host Adam Jasa. In just over 2 months, Poles will elect their next president. On the face of it, the post carries a huge popular mandate. But in reality, its holder wields much less executive power than their American or French counterparts. Most of that power can only be used to hamstring legislation and meddle in appointments. If the president and prime minister come from opposing political camps, as is the case now, French-style cohabitation becomes constant confrontation. So what is it going to be, and how will the outcome influence Poland's ability to navigate the global upheaval? That is the question we will answer shortly, but first let's take a look at who is in the race.
Poland's presidential election in May gives Prime Minister Donald Tusk a chance to end a paralyzing cohabitation with President Andrzej Duda of the Eurosceptic opposition Law and Justice. But far more is at stake than just governance. This vote will determine whether Poland remains a key European player and Ukraine's staunch ally. The election pits Rafał Trzaskowski, the centrist frontrunner and mayor of Warsaw, against Karol Nawrocki, a right-wing historian with little political or international experience, backed by Law and Justice. Sławomir Mentzen, the far-right Confederation candidate, is polling in third place, with other candidates far behind. President Duda cannot seek re-election after 2 consecutive 5-year terms. The 53-year-old Trzaskowski represents the same vision as Tusk, a Poland deeply embedded in the European Union, maintaining close ties with the United States and advocating for Ukraine's integration into the EU and NATO. Nawrocki and Law and Justice propose a different course, fully embracing Trump's nativist rebellion against woke culture and the old global order, of which for them, the EU is the ultimate symbol. For Law and Justice, Trump's return to the White House is more than welcome. It's an opportunity to align with him and reclaim power after their 2023 parliamentary defeat. Nawrocki has praised Trump, while attacking Tusk and Trzaskowski as servants of European elites. Following Trump's shocking dressing down of President Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House, Nawrocki criticized the Ukrainian leader, while some Law and Justice officials echoed Trump administration claims, questioning Zelensky's legitimacy. The party's anti-Ukrainian shift has even unsettled some of its own supporters, traditionally critical of Russia. It also appeared to irk President Duda, who distanced himself from Nawrocki's campaign events. Duda has backed Ukraine's EU and NATO bid, but Nawrocki has expressed skepticism, tapping into growing discontent over Ukrainian refugees and long-standing historical grievances.
I do not see Ukraine in any structure, neither in the European Union nor in NATO, until such important civilizational issues for Poles are resolved.
One reason for Nawrocki's increasing radicalism may be his weak campaign, which has opened the door for an even more Ukraine-hostile candidate, Sławomir Mentzen of the far-right Confederation. A former ultra-nationalist and economic libertarian, Mentzen has built his career on incendiary rhetoric.
The Confederation's 5-point plan. We don't want Jews, abortion, homosexuals, taxes, or the European Union.
Since then, he has toned down his messaging, purging open anti-Semites and radicals from his party. Surveys suggest he is siphoning support from older Law and Justice voters and younger, disillusioned Poles who see mainstream parties as stale and compromised. Mentzen has rebranded, presenting himself as a serious politician focused on what resonates with young Poles: lower taxes, fewer regulations, and a state that, quote, gets out of their way. His criticism of the EU remains, but given broad public support for membership, he now channels his populism into anti-Ukrainian sentiment, echoing Russian narratives about Ukrainian refugees taking jobs and men from Polish women.
We're sending weapons, money and social benefits to Ukraine. Ukrainians get free healthcare in Poland, while Poles must pay. And in return, slander, insults and no gratitude. They treat us like fools.
Mentzen's strategy is paying off. In some polls, he is catching up to Nawrocki, whose support lags behind Law and Justice's base. If the trend continues, Mentzen could emerge as Trzaskowski's main challenger in the first round on May 18th.
A lot to unpack, and I'm delighted we have 2 excellent experts to do this with us. Karolina Zbytniewska, editor-in-chief at Eurosceptic Poland, and Leszek Jażdżewski, editor-in-chief at Liberty magazine. Welcome to both of you.
It's
Pleasure
great
to be here.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Thank you. So, Leszek, I want to ask you first. You know, it seems a bit strange to international audiences that you have the president and you have the prime minister, and it's not entirely clear who is in charge. I don't know if you recall, but Henry Kissinger used to have that problem, allegedly, with Europe. Who to call in Europe? Do foreign leaders have a problem who to call in Poland?
Well, I think it was Kissinger who said that the lower the stakes, the bigger the issue of quarreling. So I think it is very similar here in Poland. So it's much, well, you can say it's much to do about nothing, but it's not nothing. So it's extremely important to have a president in your own camp, because the president has such a huge negative power. Basically, you need 3/5 to reject the veto of the president at the parliament. So basically, even if you have a majority, as is the case with the government right now, they cannot reject the veto of the president. And obviously, the position of the president also is derived from the fact that if he is a real leader of his own camp, as was the first president under new constitution, President Kwaśniewski, who actually wrote this constitution, then his sort of informal influence is also to be considered. And obviously the president is, let's say, by not by law, but is communicating with other presidents. So currently Andrzej Duda is trying to make amends with Donald Trump. It used to be the Polish president, who goes to Ukraine, to Russia, other republics where you have presidential republics.
But that's foreign policy. But when it comes to, let's say, domestic policy, in the campaign we've seen these candidates talk about policies. They are talking about, I don't know, reproductive rights, or they're talking about taxes. But in fact, it's Parliament which decides on such issues. They don't really have much to say. Karolina, what do you think?
As Leszek was basically saying, I would agree that a lot of presidential power is that veto right, but on the other hand, it can be the end of this very difficult cohabitation with the next president. So then it's not veto, it's constructive approach of the president that is combining, aligning with the governing party. So it can be also a very productive and constructive partnership. But at the same time, what we see with President Duda, although he has been vetoing many initiatives by the current government, however, at the same time, nowadays, with Donald Trump in the White House, he tried to play the kind of a middleman between unfriendly liberals that are being represented by prime ministers like Donald Tusk and Donald Trump, which is an important role. And as such figure, he is now trying, for example, to advance this 3% of GDP spending in NATO, which is a step forward Trump's expectations.
Right. So at least when it comes to Ukraine and security, we see cohabitation working at the moment. But what happens if this changes? If we have, rather than Mr. Trzaskowski, who leads the race at the moment, but let's say Mr. Nawrocki or Mr. Mentzen, what does it mean for Poland, Leszek?
Well, it's a very good question. I think very few people imagine that it will be possible to have continuation of the current
we've
situation.
seen all sorts of strange things.
Well, obviously we did. And that's why I think, even though Trzaskowski is leading in the race, as you indicated in this opening part of the program, it has to be considered that there is a possibility that either of the other right-wing candidates might win, might prevail. So definitely it's going to be extremely difficult for domestic policy of the government. Some people even think that it cannot survive. I think I wouldn't go that far, but I think it would be extremely difficult to sustain.
So in other words, there would have to be early parliamentary elections?
Well, in some way, yes. But on the other hand, then you think about the interests of the coalition parties, considering that all the partners of Donald Tusk wouldn't make it to the parliament. And with the presidents from the right-wing parties, it will be almost guaranteed that the current coalition would move to the opposition, so they're going to lose the election. They're not going to rule with, if they're going to lose the presidential elections.
In other words, power will cement that coalition, even if they lose the presidential vote.
I believe that would be a sort of like a negative tension where they would try to blame the new president for everything. I'm sort of surprised it hasn't happened yet. So you see that Andrzej Duda is not really vetoing much because he doesn't get much to veto. It's not like the previous cohabitation with late Lech Kaczyński and Donald Tusk. Then Lech Kaczyński was the sort of source of the all evil in the eyes of the pro-government supporters.
So what does it mean for Ukraine? Because so far, the perception in the West around the world is that Poland is the staunch ally of Ukraine, that it's most vocal on its aspirations, on its security. Can this change if, let's say, Mr. Nawrocki or Mr. Mentzen become president?
Well, I would say that we should make no mistake. I mean, first of all, Ukraine is not really the main issue of the campaign. Secondly, of course, the candidates, they differ very much on how they approach Ukraine. On the other hand, if you look at the domestic policy, none of them are extremely pro-Ukrainian. It just doesn't make political sense to be very pro-Ukrainian, and especially if you think about sending troops to Ukraine. Almost unilaterally, the voters oppose it from all the camps. But obviously, the Mentzen is sort of, as you indicated in the material, he's really a nationalist. He's not even very pro-Atlanticist. I mean, he might like Donald Trump, but he really believes we should be on our own. They're very, let's say, Russia understanding. Mentzen, yeah. Mm-hmm. They're very much sort of, I would say they're pro-Russian, basically. I don't think we ever had such a big party which is pro-Russian, and the Confederacy is traditionally pro-Russian. He's trying to hide it, but he is. And he's sort of for peace. And then you have Nawrocki, which, he's an interesting character, because the Law and Justice has been very pro-Ukrainian from the very beginning. It was in the Polish interest. But he's trying to distance himself, because he understands that in the right-wing, with right-wing voters, this is basically the reason why they are not supporting him, but they are supporting Mentzen. And then you have Trzaskowski, who is a very traditional, I mean, I would say he's extremely pro-European. He's trying to hide it.
Everyone is hiding something, you're suggesting.
Yes. Politics.
Carolina, what is your take on this, on Ukraine, Europe?
My general take, the same with Nawrocki and Mentzen, is that they are basing their agendas on research, on sociological research, and they know and well understand how the voters and how their opponents' voters would like them to behave, and they adapt their agendas to what is the demand side of our society. So they attach their supply to the demand, not the other way around. So we heard the five of Confederation. I will not repeat these very ugly phrases and words, but I watched some materials chaired by Sławomir Mentzen, and he was actually saying that it was all based on the social research, and then after they got into the parliament, he had to adapt their agenda. That's why they toned down about this anti-Semitic agendas and so on.
So
because
they wanted to be respectable.
Well, you can say so, but the reason was that they wanted to stick to the parliament, to keep on being electable, and to go towards mainstream. So they start at the fringe right and then go to mainstream, not to be out of politics, like, for example, Korwin-Mikke, that they also sideline.
Another far-right figure with the sideline. Yes. Leszek mentioned this interesting fact that they're repeating some of the Kremlin lines, be it on Ukraine, be it on security, gas, energy, Western decadence, you name it. But it is also interesting that Mentzen's party has been traditionally anti-NATO, for example. And now they're cheering Trump, even though they're, in principle, quite skeptical about America. And this reminds me of the Alternative für Deutschland, the German party, which did well in elections. So maybe it's a winning formula.
It's a winning formula. Yesterday, I talked to an expert on disinformation from Slovakia, and he told me, you know, to become a star online, it's very easy. You just need to hate LGBT people, you just need to hate liberals, and so on. It's really easy. And who Mentzen is? He is a great star in internet, on the social media. He's responsible on all of them. He's responsible for around 50% of all interactions, political interactions related to these political elections. Then we have as a second Rafał Trzaskowski with, you know, around 20, then Nawrocki around 18, and then Stanowski with around 11, while people
Mr.
like
Stanowski has
Hołownia...
very little support.
Yes, yes, support in general, but I mean the support on, not support, existence online, while people like Hołownia, Biejat, Zandberg, they are barely visible.
You mean the other candidates with
Online,
marginal
I mean
support?
online.
So can a repeat of Romania history where, you know, a candidate who nobody believed would win can suddenly surge because of this campaign, Leszek?
Well, I think very few people expected actually such a result in Romania and then cancelling the elections. So I do believe that it's unlikely. I think...
Why?
Well, first of all, because Mentzen is not very popular among the older voters. It's understatement. He's very unpopular. And secondly, I don't think that our elections must be necessarily cancelled, even though there are rule of law issues that are not solved because of lack of the president who would actually sign them. But I wanted to touch upon on the things you mentioned before. We see a very interesting phenomenon. So Donald Trump, who wants to speak to Putin, he is pushing the rights, which were traditionally anti-Russian, the law and justice, towards Russia. We see they don't criticize Trump for being so pro-Putin, who is actually doing he's stalking Putin very much. So they cannot be anti-Trump because they invested so much in him. It's quite similar with Mentzen, but they were usually quite Russian understanding, as I mentioned before. But what we see now, they are anti-European. We saw this voting in the European Parliament, where they voted in principle against their own group, ECR, just to be against more European security. So they try to blame Europe. They pretend Trump is not pro-Russian. And I'm very curious how it's going to affect the voters. Are they going to say, all right, we need to make amends with Russia? Ukraine is to blame. This is what they're trying to say. It's a tectonic shift, I believe, in Polish politics.
You meaning that the moderate right or conservatives are sort of changing their rhetoric when it comes to Russia? So far, we haven't seen that much of it.
No, it's true. They try to avoid the issue. They try to pretend Trump is not doing what he's doing. And obviously, Trump can do 180 tomorrow.
Right.
But I'm very curious how it's going to affect the long-term approach towards Ukraine. And are we going to see a peace party? And this quotation mark here is like the peace party who's trying to be opening themselves to Russia and be, in fact, anti-Ukrainian. So not supportive of Ukraine, understanding that, not understanding that our defense security really depends on how Ukraine fares after the ceasefire.
But there's a certain, Karolina, there's a certain inconsistency in law and justice approach, because on the one hand, they're saying, well, we need to focus our security on US presence in Europe, and they're skeptical about European initiatives, any European initiatives in defense, which was, you know, a traditional way of thinking in Poland. But now we see Trump sort of withdrawing from Europe and certainly signaling that he wants to be less involved in European security. And still, it seems Law and Justice is betting the entire House on just the US rather than Europe. So this is inconsistent to me.
I think that voters of Law and Justice have a huge cognitive dissonance at the moment, seeing the Trump's pivot to Russia, not Asia anymore, but to Russia, while we know the anti-Russian stance that peace, meaning law and justice, has always had. But as we were saying, it's it's being all supported by the opinion polls. We see that pro-Trump stance is being very much represented within the peace camp and even more within Sławomir Mentzen camp. So it's the well thought about strategy that aims at taking over voters from Sławomir Mentzen. That's my opinion. Plus, you know, you are strong when you stick to the strong ones, and Trump is the strong man by definition, so I think that's the reason.
But it's interesting that Trump, and particularly Mr. Musk's intervention in some of the electoral processes earlier, maybe not in the electoral processes in the United Kingdom, but certainly in UK politics, they seem to backfire, and certainly in Germany, despite all the hype about Musk supporting AfD and J.D. Vance, the vice president, supporting AfD, in the end they didn't surprise, you know, if anything, they slightly underperformed. So is this a wise strategy, attaching your wagon to the Trump train?
Look at Canada. In Canada, the Liberals are back. So the open confrontation, I don't think it helps actually those who are attacking. But I'm not really worried about open, remarks on Twitter by Elon Musk. I mean, okay, it's his medium. He can write whatever he wants. It is the algorithm. We see recently that the right-wing propaganda, I think you mentioned this, Karolina, before, at anything that is right-wing is so much more popular, not just on Twitter, but on social media. And you can say, okay, maybe it's overwhelming, it's turned to the right, but I do believe that there is a risk that we see a foreign intervention by owners of social media who try to support the right-wing rhetoric, which means that people believe that actually in society there is a turn to the right. So it influences politics. So then the politics makes a pivot to the right, and everything moves right-wing, and then everyone seems to agree with Sławomir Mentzen. And I think this is a very dangerous, because it's hidden. We don't really know what's happening. We can't control it. It's not transparent. And this is a real threat to democracy.
I can add to that, that these bubbles are really closed. So it's not really that the far right and right bubble can very much influence Trzaskowski and the left bubble. Because as far as I know, some research, around 92% of the bubble of Rafał Trzaskowski is totally closed, that they don't see other news apart from Elon Musk, because I also see him all the time.
Right. So now, usually I have a crystal ball somewhere here, but this time I forgot about it. So you'll have to do without a crystal ball. So at the end, I want to ask you, who is going to win, in your opinion? Karolina, you
I
go
wouldn't
first.
like to answer this question. I am sorry, but we see the opinion polls, and I would say that I agree with the opinion polls. What else can I do?
Leszek.
Trzaskowski is likely to win, but it's not a highway to victory. And there is still a chance he's going to lose. And I think it's going to be, in the end, very close to 50-50 election.
And then what happens?
Well,
Is it going to be a contested result, do you think?
if there is a very small margin of victory of either of the candidates, I do believe that we might get into legal issues. I think in the end it might not get to that, but it's not I think out of the cards.
But certainly it will be a close run.
Karolina, Leszek, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching. This was On The Record, and see you next week.